I mean, here's the numbers on Hurts last year. Even if you take away touchdowns, he was at 43% rushing share. And when you put touchdowns in there, it was almost 50-50. I mean, that is Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Taysom Hill level, where it's like literally half their points are coming on the ground. So I think, what would you pay for Hurts? What would you pay? Not what the market would pay. Like, what's the highest pick you would pay right now?
Is that our theme song?
Yeah, that's the theme song. It's been the theme song since the beginning. Yeah, Manic and Chill. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Well, we're back. First time in, the last time we did this was right before the fantasy playoffs, I think. Maybe not. Yeah, we always say, hey, we're going to get together and do this every 2 weeks. And then 8 weeks later, we finally decide to do an episode. But we'll promise you for the 10th time, we're going to try to do it more consistently now that there's going to be content, hopefully, now that the Super Bowl is over. But Manic and Chill's back, 2021. Definitely the first episode of the year, first episode of the quote-unquote off-season. Dynasty off-season is already ramping up, so we have some topics to talk about. I talk to Shane all the time, but this is the first time we've actually got together on the video. So, Shane, how's it going?
Hey.
What's new in life?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Oh, wait, I had COVID. I think, I beat COVID during since the last time we recorded, so.
Yeah, you got a lot of writing and research and a lot of downtime and sleep, right?
Yeah. And then we were working on something. I can't remember what though. We were working on something. I guess DLF will let the world know shortly.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to my podcast, I've mentioned it kind of a couple times, but I really have kept it pretty vague on what it is. So you'll find out soon, I assume. But yeah, we have some off-season content to talk about. There's been a lot of happenings that have gone on since we recorded last. We obviously had the fantasy playoffs. We had the NFL playoffs, a bunch of coaching changes. But now let's focus mainly on quarterback season because I think there's a couple topics to talk about. Obviously, a couple people already on DLF have covered. We've done some videos on the Goff and Stafford trade, but we just happen to be recording on the day. We'll start with the Carson Wentz deal to the Eagles because you're an Eagles fan, former Eagles fan. I know you still root for the Eagles a little bit, though. You still have a soft spot. I know you do because I know you keep up with pretty much everything that's going on with the Eagles. You're still one of my go-to guys when I need an opinion on something related to the Eagles. But let's just get your breakdown. First, just from the trade standpoint, but then we'll just kind of get into some Superflex strategy because I'm very convicted on this. I've been convicted on this. And now that the trade actually happened, you see all these reactions of like, oh, let's go do this. And I'll get into my stance on why I think that's bad dynasty process, but let's hear yours.
I put myself on mute, but just to touch on that. So I went on the DLF trade finder and obviously wouldn't have trades from today. It happened before that. But there's one where this guy, it was a slam dunk. He gave up a second round 2021 pick for Wentz in a Superflex a couple days ago. So good for you. You're not doing that today. It's the best spot for him. It's where we wanted him to land if you want him to be a fantasy asset. There was the rumblings that he could have ended up in Chicago, and apparently they never even made an offer. From what's coming out now. But the only realistic place was Indianapolis. And that's where you wanted him to go, back to Frank Reich. He gets to hang out with his buddy Press Taylor, who's his quarterback coach, more like his buddy. But it's the perfect setup for him. They have a great offensive line, great running game. Pittman, I think, is going to feast. The tight ends, I think they're all free agents, so they'll have to figure something out there. But, and it's in the Midwest, and I don't want to belittle him, but he clearly is not an East Coast guy and couldn't deal with the limelight in the big city. So Indianapolis is a nice, Midwest town. I think it's a city, right? So I think he's going to do great there. I look, as a player, on a personal level, I dislike him now. One, because he's a former Eagle and I'm from Philadelphia and we're very petty. But also I don't like the way he handled anything. But from fantasy football perspective, I love this landing spot for him. Honestly, when he was about to go to Chicago, at least we thought he was going to go to Chicago a week and a half ago, I shipped him off for a 110 in a Superflex league. I was that worried. Now I'm wishing I didn't do that. Good for Tyler Gunther, who took advantage of my panic there. But he's got top 12 QB upside in Indianapolis. And I know there's another quarterback that is definitely going to be a starter now, and you're pretty convicted on him.
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of hit on a bunch of different topics, but just kind of piggyback on what you said with Wentz. Obviously, a better landing spot than Chicago going to Indianapolis. And it sounds like maybe this is just rumblings. I don't have all of the rumors in front of me, but it sounded like Wentz, maybe via his agent or through the media, kind of soured on going to Chicago, which, if I'm the Bears and I'm in their situation, they're basically on a 1-year rental. So why would you want to bring in a guy that clearly has already, through the grapevine said, I don't want to be there, and you're going to basically stake your job on the line for a guy that is going to get there. You don't really have a lot of supporting cast around him, and you're going to bring him in, and then he's already going to come to work with a bad attitude. Like, that's not the kind of employee you want to bring in when your job's on the line, because you're both going to probably end up going down in flames. So that kind of killed, I think, the market. People saw the deal where the Eagles got a third, and then they get a conditional second that I think can become a first with some caveats or some incentives in the deal, I believe, was the way that it falls out eventually for the Eagles, but not nearly, what the rumors were that they were asking for multiple firsts, or at least a first a couple weeks ago. They didn't get anything close to that.
On the pick thing, so it's a conditional second. So they get a third and a conditional second in 2022. It can become a first if he plays 75% of the snaps, or 70% and the Colts make the playoffs.
Okay.
And even though he's very injury prone, or at least that's the knock on him, he's actually played more than 75% of snaps in every season except last year when he got benched.
Yeah. Interesting. So that's basically, that gives a little security to the Colts, where if he's good, they're probably going to keep him in there and he's going to hit those marks. So it'll be good for both teams if it ends up that way, but not nearly the arms race that you thought it might be. Basically, it ended up being a one-team race. The Colts were the best fit. I think that maybe where I disagree, I still like the fact that you got the 110 for him. I think that's probably around the going price now. I don't think the market is out there for Wentz like people think. And maybe it's because I'm very jaded on Wentz. I don't think he has top 12 upside. I don't think he has top 15 upside. I think he has a very, very, very narrow window to actually get there. I'm not going to rehash it on this, but I just posted that thread today on Twitter about, how quarterbacks become quarterback ones. And not saying you can't do it, but you have to contribute a pretty decent share on the ground. That's your best bet to get there. If you look at Wentz from, where he was in 2019, 11% on the ground. So, he has a reputation of a guy that actually can score some points on the ground. But if you actually look at where he compares in these numbers, he's not really at the point where, you'd want him to be. 2018, he was only 5%. So he's not getting there on the ground like you might think. And 15 was just a kind of the arbitrary cutoff where I cut it off and said guys below 15 are, you have to be really efficient. And then if you just look at the last 2 years of Wentz's efficiency, it's not good. So he just doesn't have the recipe of the type that I would bet to get there. Maybe if he can get to 12, 13% and improve, I think he could probably be a top 15 quarterback. But, where would you slot him in right now? ADP wise, just take a guess, because I'm gonna have to look at where he was prior to this, and I know he's gonna move up just with a move to where he clearly is gonna go somewhere where he's the locked-in starter. But he was quarterback before this trade. He was at quarterback 23. I'll give you the names of guys ahead of him. This is as of January's ADP. Obviously you move him ahead of Mitchell Trubisky, Taysom Hill, Tom Brady. You would agree with those three?
Man, Tom Brady, I'm tired of betting against him.
I know. That's the one I said the name, and I'm like, well, if you can get one more year out of Brady, that's almost a similar bet to some of these risky starters,
And he was making rumblings that he might even stick around longer now. So I'm going to leave Brady in my top 12 until he retires, I think.
Okay. So clearly over Trubisky and Taysom Hill, though, yes?
Not even close, yeah.
Matt Ryan or Wentz?
Take Wentz. Matt Ryan's 35 years old.
Yeah, Daniel Jones or Carson Wentz?
These feel like the same guy, even though their play style is completely different. And this is probably going to be the Philadelphia bias in me, but yeah, I'll take Wentz.
I'd take Jones. I think he has higher rushing upside. I think they both have similar deficiencies passing, and I think there's a chance. I think Jones has a little higher ceiling to go from a passing perspective. Maybe that's just me being jaded from last year, but I mean, Jones has if you look at his numbers last year passing, I mean, pathetic. One of the worst passers in the whole league. So, I mean, even compared to Wentz, him and Wentz were both really bad last year, but I mean, if anyone could be worse than Wentz last year, it was Daniel Jones. I mean, I think he only had, maybe I'm pulling it out of thin air, but I believe Daniel Jones only had 5 passing touchdowns last year, if I'm recalling this correctly. Maybe I'm mislooking, but no, he had 11 passing touchdowns last year. But at least in the efficiency that I tracked for Daniel Jones, I mean, outside, he was 40th in points created per attempt and completion. I mean, that's pretty bad. And there's only like 46 guys that qualified with enough attempts. I mean, so he's down at the bottom. I mean, so even like Jones or even like Drew Lock and Carson Wentz were better than him. And those guys were, Lock, Darnold, and Wentz are grouped together as like probably the 3 worst guys that started for like 12 or more games last year. So he's down below them. Goff or Wentz at this point?
I think you know how I feel about Goff, but in case the Manic and Chill crowd doesn't, I think Goff is a career backup after next year. I'm still going to take Wentz. I know how bad he was last year, trust me, and it was historically bad. And, I've said that before, and it's not just hyperbole. Like there's just historic data showing that like he had the worst drop in QBR, QB rating, all that stuff. Of anyone under the age of like 36 from the season prior. It was bad. It was so bad. And it's easy to let that color it because he looked broken last year. But if you look what he was in 2017, 18, and 19, he was a top 12 quarterback, even with the lack of rushing. You're right, though, because if he doesn't fix whatever's wrong with him passing-wise, he doesn't have that rushing upside. He's only rushed for, like you were saying, he's never even cracked 300 yards rushing in a season, which seems crazy to me because he was super mobile at one point, and he's not now. But, he just doesn't have that rushing upside anymore. But I don't think he's going to need it in Indianapolis, to be quite honest with you. It's going to be a unique thing for him to drop back and have 2.5 full seconds to, read the defense and actually complete a pass.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, last year he was actually at almost 30% rushing share, but his passing was so bad that I think the percentage is maybe a little bit misleading. Like just because you hit 30%, but if you are 35th in points, then who cares? You know what I mean? Because you're not doing anything. You're not even threatening. You almost have to be in like the top 20. Then you add the rushing in there. That's what can take these guys up into, flirting with the top 12. But I kind of look at last year and say, okay, is he really even when you remove touchdowns, because sometimes touchdowns are fluky. I think I haven't done a study on this fully, but I think there are some quarterbacks, there's a level of mobility for certain types of quarterbacks. I think of like Ryan Tannehill, where they use him very effectively around the goal line. Like they will call rushing plays for him. There's some quarterbacks that if you take out their touchdowns, their rushing really isn't that, impactful. But Wentz was even 20% without the touchdowns. If you take away his rushing touchdowns, because he had rushing touchdowns last year that accounted for a lot of his fantasy points. But he was still at 20% without that. But if you remove just the guys we talked about, Goff, we can go 50-50 on Daniel Jones. But if you just remove Goff, Taysom Hill, Mitchell Trubisky, and maybe Matt Ryan, those four. Wentz is already up to quarterback 19 in Dynasty, quarterback 18 to 20. Let's just call him in that range. So I guess I kind of look at it and say, what are the odds that if you're paying that price, okay, what are the odds that he is going to give you any sort of profit on what you paid? You know what I mean? Like you're almost paying for him at the level where you need a quarterback 3 or a quarterback 2. You know what you're buying. You're probably not, to me, you're not buying a lot of upside. That's my take on Wentz. So I know you kind of disagree. Maybe you think he has a higher ceiling, but
and I'm probably still biased because I saw every week in 2017 when he looked like the best quarterback in football.
Right.
He definitely did not look like that last year, but he was good in 2019 when he dragged terrible wide receivers to the playoffs with him. And he was decent in 2018 before he got hurt. I still feel like he can creep into that top 12. Now, I'm not under the delusion that he could ever be a QB1, the QB1, I should say.
Right.
That could never happen. He's never going to crack that tier. He's not going to get into that Watson, Mahomes, Kyler, Lamar, whoever else is in there, Dak, maybe Trevor Lawrence after next year. I don't see him ever cracking that tier again. He can definitely give you weeks where he might be the quarterback 1, but he'll never be the quarterback 1. I still think he could be a low end quarterback 1, and you're not paying for that. You're paying for a QB2, QB3. Right. And he is in that group of guys. That's just a group of guys now where you can tell yourself a story where they become a QB1. You could tell yourself Baker Mayfield, if this happens, he could be a QB1. Like you're saying, Daniel Jones, if his touchdowns regress to normal numbers, he had 11 touchdowns last year on nearly the same amount of attempts as the year before, when he had 24 touchdowns or something. Yeah. And he does have that rushing upside. And if Evan Ingram can stop dropping 15% of his passes, and Saquon Barkley can make you look really good on the dump off. So, he's in that group of guys that I could tell myself can be a QB1, but I definitely don't know it. Like I know Mahomes, I know Deshaun Watson, I know Kyler Murray, I know Lamar Jackson are all QB1s because one, they have that rushing upside. So when the passing isn't working for them, although Mahomes doesn't run as much, but when the passing's not work for him, they can take off and run.
Yeah, we'll get into this more. I think that, when you say the other thing we're not going to get into now, but if you really look at, where the cutoffs were last year, a low end quarterback 1, if you finish quarterback 11 or 12, you're probably not making that much more of an impact than the quarterback 16 or 17. So you can almost lump those guys in. And I think we've seen that now. There's a separation of basically the haves and the have-nots in Dynasty. And then there's a bunch of guys that are lumped in the middle. I think the one positive thing for Wentz is right now you can go down the line and look at the ADP. Once you get to like 18, 19, everyone else behind there, you're going, I'm not sure, A, where they're going to play. And I'm not sure that there's a non-zero chance that a couple of these guys just end up on the wrong side of the quarterback carousel. And, there's bigger risk with some than others. But at least now you know that a team has traded for Wentz. You know he's going to be the starter for 2021. So I can't blame somebody for saying, okay, I'm willing to pay now a little bit more for him than Daniel Jones or, Sam Darnold or even someone like Matt Ryan. Like Matt Ryan's probably going to be the starter, but there's still some risk that if they draft a quarterback that A, his value is going to go down if they draft a quarterback, and B, if it's a quarterback inside the top 6, 8 picks, like the numbers usually say that player gets on the field. So you don't know that there's not a chance that the Falcons start 2-6 and they go, well, let's see what the rookie has. Because we know we're moving on from Matt Ryan probably after one more year. So why not give the rookie a little bit of a head start? It's a new regime. So I do think that there's risk with some of these other guys more so now than Wentz. I guess I just wouldn't play it to where if I believed in Wentz, if you look back at what you said, like I agree, he was really good in 2017, really pretty good in 2019 with what he had to work with. You should have bought already. Because all that's changed now is the situation has been stamped. That's it. Nothing's really changed with his profile. Nothing's changed with his contract. Nothing's changed with his pedigree or his historical production. So if you're buying now and you're paying, the 108 to 110, you probably could have bought for the 202, 203 2 months ago when he got benched. And it was like, he may be on the Eagles and Hurts may be the starter and he may just be buried for another year. Like that was a real fear. You know what I mean? That he was just going to have to compete for a job. He was never going to be just handed the job again. Now he's going to be handed the job for at least one more year. So, it's just more of a process thing. But I don't know. You have any other things on Wentz before you move on to Hurts?
No, but I love the process thing. You can't buy him now because now you're paying full retail plus the extra tax because he's going to Frank Reich. If you were going to buy him even a month ago when there was rumblings where he might get traded, you should have done it then.
Well, and like you said, that's why I think your deal for the 110 was great because you kind of got like what the cash in price was a little bit early. But I could also see where the person buying at the 110 said, well, it might cost me more once he goes to Indy. So both of you kind of played the situation right. You know what I mean? I guess I just look at it and say, if I'm trying to buy now and I know I'm taking some risk by giving up a pick, who's the next Wentz? Who has the profile that's being underpriced by like 20, 30% that I still believe is going to land on their feet? Buy that guy. Buy Jimmy Garoppolo if you believe he's going to land as a starter. Maybe it's he doesn't have the track record as Wentz. He doesn't have the pedigree. But I think you can probably buy him for like a mid-second. And the only thing you're gambling on is that he becomes a starter. You know what I mean? And I did want to throw this out. The stuff about Garoppolo, it's interesting. We didn't talk about the Goff and Stafford trade, but I don't know if anyone listens to Mike Lombardi, but his podcast the other day, he brought this up, and I didn't know about it because I haven't heard many people talk about it. Did you know Garoppolo had a no trade clause?
So that's one of those things I know now. I'm not really sure when I found out, kind of like when you find out Santa Claus isn't real. Like it's kind of one of those things like you've always known, but you don't know when you knew.
Yeah. I didn't know. And because I don't think it had been covered in a lot of mainstream articles, because you see for the last 2 months, it's just been an echo chamber of like, this quarterback's going to go here. And how about this trade idea? That sounds great. But he basically laid it out. And I love Mike Lombardi because he is blunt. He'll swear. I mean, he'll basically just say it what it is. He has no real affiliation anymore in the NFL. So he'll just say it what it is. And he goes, this is what's going on. Jimmy Garoppolo has a no trade clause. And he's basically been informed that he's not going to be the starter for San Francisco. But he also has a no trade clause. And he's due to make this money in 2021. And he's basically going, well, trade me where I want, or I'm just going to block anywhere you want to go. And you remember that the Niners were in on Stafford. You remember hearing that they were in on Stafford? And it makes a lot more sense now that they were in on Stafford, but you haven't heard them in on Wentz at all. Not really, other than just Twitter rumblings or rumors. And you haven't really heard them in on Watson. And it's probably because, does Jimmy G really want to go to Houston? Or does he really want to go to Philly? I mean, those probably aren't places where he's going, yeah, let me go there. But it makes sense they were in on Stafford because I think Detroit may have been a team where he would have been promised a starting job. They may have taken him back, very similar to Goff, where they can use a bridge starter. And if they knew the Rams were after Stafford, that was almost an arms race because if the Rams didn't get Stafford, they wouldn't have found anybody else to take Goff and give him back a quarterback that they really wanted. So I think that may have been why the Rams were like, okay, let's go. What do you want? We'll do it right now. We'll overpay. And I think the Niners are kind of left holding the bag now because they need to give Garoppolo back in a trade, or they cut him and they end up basically getting nothing for him and they eat his contract, whatever they would have to pay to cut him. So I think that makes sense where that was an arms race almost between the Niners and the Rams. And I think the Rams won. And I think they probably knew because the Niners were the only other team that was a real competition. And now I think the Niners are stuck. So I think that was a very interesting dichotomy there where Jimmy G really holds all the cards. He can decline any trade. And between how many teams he wants to go to and how many teams are knocking down their door to trade for him, I just don't see there being many suitors for them unless they come up with like a 3-way trade where maybe they get somebody else and they can move Jimmy G to another team. So any thoughts on that? I thought that was interesting, the dynamic between two division rivals.
Yeah, I mean, the only way I could see him moving is someone getting a pick for eating his contract. similar to what the Browns did with, I guess, was it Osweiler a few years ago?
Yeah.
Just so San Francisco can move him, because he's a backup. I mean, he was given a chance to start. I don't think he's anything special. I don't think he's a starting quarterback in the league. Maybe Bill will take him back. Although Bill, it's telling that there's really been no rumblings whatsoever about New England wanting any parts of Jimmy Garoppolo, when that's an easy dots to connect.
Well, it's interesting because I actually think Jimmy G is better than what the perception is. The knock on him is he just can't stay on the field. He's just hurt. He's been hurt constantly. I mean, obviously he had a torn ACL, nothing you can do about that. But then, he took a little time to come back from the ACL, and then he got injured a couple times last year with different things. I mean, maybe it's bad luck, but you just can't really trust him. I mean, his contract is not terrible. I mean, he's due to make $25 million next year, or it's a $26.4 million cap hit, but only a $2.8 million dead cap if they were to cut him before June 1st. So, I mean, he's not that hard to cut. But if I'm San Francisco, I would love to find a way to just move him to another team and maybe get a credit in the trade for moving him versus having to cut him and then go out and trade. Because if they're in the sweepstakes to go after like Watson or even somebody like Darnold, who I'm not even sure Darnold is a huge upgrade over Garoppolo at this point. But like, does it really make sense to cut Garoppolo and then go trade like, a second or a late future first for Darnold or something like that? Doesn't make sense to me. So I think it would make sense if they could give Garoppolo back in the trade and get credit, or at least just be able to move him in one move. I don't really know, but I actually think Garoppolo is a better bet than others. I would actually buy him if I could do it for a late second or a mid second, if I needed a desperate quarterback.
So that's the next guy. That's the guy to target.
Yeah.
The next guy that could move. Sam Darnold, I think, is a guy we've talked about before. And I think a lot of people in Dynasty are sneakily targeting him because, we're all under the Adam Gase is going away narrative. So Sam Darnold is clearly going to be a QB1 next year because that's what happens to fantasy assets when they get away from Adam Gase. So he's another guy. Yeah. So probably Garoppolo is probably the most under the radar one because I think most of the community feels like Maine thinks he's not very good. And you know what? I could be wrong, and I'm fine with that. So there's no reason not to hedge and pick him up in a few leagues because I'm sure you can get him cheap. Like you said, probably rookie second.
Well, and unlike Wentz, unlike Darnold, he does not have the pedigree that those guys do. I think many even disagreed with he timed it perfectly with getting the contract that he did too. He really didn't have to show anything to get that contract. He lingered, had a very small sample size with the Patriots, and then, it's almost like the hype built him up, and then he ended up in a friendly place, and they're like, well, we're going to give this guy a contract. I mean, he really, from a pedigree standpoint or from a past performance standpoint, it never really earned that contract. So you almost can't look at his contract and say, oh, well, this guy's a legitimate starter because he's been paying like one. That's not really the case. So I think there is significant questions. If I had to bet of all the guys that could be hitting the market, he is probably on the higher end of the guys that are not guaranteed to get another legitimate shot to start. I mean, I think he's probably more in the range of similar bets to, obviously these guys have to sign somewhere or get traded, but I don't think he's that better of a bet than like Winston and Mariota at this point. Because I think they have the pedigree and they sat for a year too. So I think a team may be more apt to kind of chase that versus, coming off another Garoppolo year where he wasn't that good and he was hurt. He may have to sit a year before he becomes a starter. So do you really want to pay, if he gets left out and you pay a 206 for him today, that's probably a loss because you probably could get him for cheaper when it's, for sure he's going to be on the bench in 2021. So I think he's a riskier bet, but I don't think it's a bad call to buy him now and fish around because we don't know where it is yet, but there's going to be a tier break in these Superflex drafts where it's like, you get to like the 208 to 210 and you're like, okay, I'm going to be picking a late day 2, early day 3 running back that is clearly a backup. And, it's either Justice Hill or Devin Singletary, like that type of player where you're just adding depth. You know what I mean? You're not addressing a need or you don't really have an asset that's worth a whole lot. So I think that range of a pick is pretty fair.
Yeah, because at that range, you're really trying to convince yourself that something's going to break right for them.
Right.
And I was a Justice Hill guy. And even then, though, you had to tell yourself, well, if this happens and then this happens and then that happens, whereas Garoppolo, at least, or Darnold, or Mariota, it's just one. If this happens, he's a starter.
Well, and we'll get more into draft talk too, but I think you're going to see that's about the range, and it happened last year too, where a lot of the pedigree players are already off the board. The first and second round receivers, the first and second round tight ends, the top 5 quarterbacks, and the draft capital running backs. At that point, you're starting to dip into the, I just think of last year, the range that went in this range of like KJ Hamler and Chase Claypool, Anthony McFarland, Darrington Evans, like those guys where, if you hit on Claypool, you're looking good, but if you hit on McFarland or Darrington Evans, that's the kind of pick where you like their profile. They had decent draft capital, but they're 50-50. Things could break right, or they could just be sitting on your bench and they're a filler. They don't gain any value. They don't really have any equity going forward. So if you can move them for one of those picks, I think that's smart. What's your thoughts on Jalen Hurts? I want to hear yours, and then I'll get into mine.
I've never been so confused about a player. I don't know what he is. He was fun to watch, and then I'd look at the stats afterwards, and I go, "Ooh, he played a lot worse than I thought, huh?" And I understand, yes, that's real football, but here's the thing: real football eventually impacts fantasy, because if he doesn't play better than he did last year, then he won't be the starter. That said, I don't know, man. That rushing ability gives you such an edge. You don't need to be a great passer. If you're just an adequate passer, but a phenomenal runner, then you can be a starter in the NFL. Whereas if you're, you can't run and you're just an adequate thrower, you're probably not going to be a starting quarterback. So I wish I could give people a better breakdown of, I don't know, but he's a guy that in half my leagues that I own him, I'm probably trading him away if I can get 108 or better, 109. And in the other half of the leagues, I'm going to hold on to him and go, this is a guy that's got QB1 upside, so I might as well just see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I like it. What's your thoughts on the Eagles in the draft? Because I think I'll get into my strategy on Hurts, but just from the standpoint of, it sounds like they do want to bring in some sort of quarterback competition. It'd be a little confusing to me for them to draft a quarterback with that high of a pick, especially because they're already eating 19% of their cap next year with Wentz's contract. So to then add another first-round contract on top of that, I know it's only – I looked up the slot earlier. I think it's like around $5 million that draft slot would be for a cap hit in year one. But that's still, basically almost wasting away at I don't want to say wasting, but basically burning the first year of a rookie contract quarterback when you already have a guy in-house. And I don't know your thoughts as a former Eagles fan, but I almost look at you're literally spending 19% of your cap on a guy you don't have. The Eagles have a mess to do just to get under the salary cap. So I almost look at next year like this is going to be a rough year for him. So to bring in a rookie quarterback that you basically waste a year with, unless you're going to play that guy and get his, growing pains out of the way in the first year, I almost kind of look at it and say, man, I think they're probably thinking they may end up back in the top 10 or higher next year. So, what do you think? Do they draft a quarterback in the top 6?
So there's rumors, in local media that they like Justin Fields. All right. Well, if you like Justin Fields, you got to get up to 2, probably 3, which is doable. I mean, hell, he's done it before, and he's got the 6th overall now. So I'm sure he could get there. It's just, and I know they say they drafted Hurts last year because it had nothing to do with the quarterback position, really. It's, depth, blah, 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 blah. But it's still a 2nd round pick you spend on a quarterback. Like you can't, I don't know successful franchises that will follow the same path where they drafted a quarterback in the 2nd round and then drafted a quarterback in the 1st round the next year. It doesn't seem like a winning organizational move to me. Even Denver gave Drew Lock a full season, and apparently is ready to give him another season. Logically, it makes no sense that they would go quarterback, but it made absolutely no sense that they went quarterback last year. So I've given up on trying to use logic to determine what NFL franchises are going to do. You're risking it either way. I mean, you have to, like you say, you have to pick a side and just go, all right, well, this is either I'm going to be right or I'm going to be wrong. There's going to be no in between, because either he's the starter or he's not. They have to bring someone in anyway, because the only other quarterback they have on under contract is Nate Sudfeld. That's not great. So maybe Ryan Fitzpatrick.
I actually think, and I just thought about this, but it makes total sense. I actually could see them bringing in a guy like Jacoby Brissett, who was with Sirianni in Indianapolis. I think that would fit, the offense that they're going to run. Even if that's not the offense they want to run going forward, I think Brissett would be somebody that is a good backup, that if Hurts just completely tanked, he's a guy that at least could come in and he has starting experience. He has over a years of full starting experience. He started a lot of games. So I could see that being a backup they bring in on a 1-year deal. And it's kind of a challenge to Hurts, because you can say, hey, this guy started, I think Brissett started like 24 games in the NFL. So, you can say he has prior starting experience, clearly a backup, but I could also see that be an appealing situation for somebody like Brissett. If you're willing to pay him okay for a year, he doesn't have a shot to win many jobs. That might be one where he could come in and he may get some starts. You know what I mean? He could audition for a more permanent backup role a year after that. Because I do think this is going to be a year where you have a lot of guys that have to bet on themselves, like show their value so that they can get that next contract the next year. So I think that would be the quote unquote type of competition they would bring in. It doesn't make sense for your competition to be a top 6 pick, because then you have this, you have this dichotomy where it's like, okay, do we, if it's Trey Lance, maybe, because people say he needs to sit, but if it's Justin Fields, he's not sitting. He's not. And then what do you have with Jalen Hurts? Because you basically just devalued Jalen Hurts. What is he, just your career backup? And I bet if you look historically at guys that had second-round draft capital or better, and they only got 4 starts and they weren't awful, they get another shot somewhere. Even if it's like they get 2 games and then people realize I think he's going to get another shot. So I think with Hurts, here's the numbers on Hurts last year. Even if you take away touchdowns, he was at 43% rushing share. And when you put touchdowns in there, it was almost 50-50. That is Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Taysom Hill level, where it's like literally half their points are coming on the ground. So I think, what would you pay for Hurts? What would you pay? Not what the market would pay. Like, what's the highest pick you would pay right now?
108. Yeah, 108. I'll go 108.
108.
Yeah.
That probably puts you in, you're deciding between the top 4 quarterbacks, Chase, the top 2 running backs, and maybe Pitts. Like, that seems to be like, or maybe another receiver. But that's probably putting you in, you're getting you're definitely getting a first-round skill player if you want one, receiver or tight end. I think that's pretty fair. I don't know if I could pay the 108 just because I don't want to give up that flexibility of the 108, but I think he's worth more than the 108 if all they do is bring in Jacoby Brissett. Because I do think with those numbers, 1 year of Jalen Hurts, if he gets 13 starts, I think he has a really good chance to be a quarterback 1. But you mentioned it at the beginning, if he's so bad and he only completes 52% of his passes, and I looked up at the sack numbers because I was under the impression last year that he actually helped the Eagles offensive line. But then the last couple games, I think he got sacked like 9 times in the last 2 games. Yeah. So it's like it was just as bad with him. And maybe that's on him. Maybe it's on the line. Maybe it's a combo of both. But man, it's almost like you really are like selling your soul, because you may only get 14 games 1 year of him, but that could literally be a quarterback 8 season if he stays in there. Yeah. So that's the risk. That really it's a big risk, big reward. But man, if you can buy now before you get that clarity in the draft, I think it's worth throwing out like high seconds, really late first for him. I think that's the margin.
Yeah, because look, we already know the hit rates on second round draft picks, rookie draft picks. It's not high anyway. Thrown in the fact that this is a guy that's a quarterback that you could give up a second round pick for. I do that all day from here to Sunday. And again, I don't even know what he's going to be after 4 games. You know, like his throwing, he looks like he doesn't know how to throw football. He sure knows how to run it though. And he at least likes to let it go at least, even if he might not always know where it's going. And he definitely seems more decisive than Wentz was. He's worth the risk. Yeah. It's like you said, he could give you QB8 easy. Or he could be QB32. There's going to be no in between with him. He's not going to be one of those guys that we were talking about earlier where, you know, they could be anywhere from 12 to 20. This guy's going to be somewhere. He's either great or he's going to be terrible.
Yeah. And I think you just hit it is the top 12 numbers are going to come if he stays and keeps the job all year. The quarterback 32 is going to come because he's benched halfway through for whoever it is. Like it's going to be a volume thing. I mean, if you get a full year of starts with him, then the next step in evaluation is, okay, did he earn the job long term? I think the one good thing with Hurts is I've never really heard a bad thing about him from a character perspective. Like he checks all those boxes. I think nobody had questions about that coming in. So it's really just going to come down. Can he do enough to where, I mean, you would say even if Hurts is pretty good, that the Eagles probably are going to be pretty bad. So it's almost a similar situation. I think maybe this sounds like a weird comparison. It's almost like a rich man's Minshew situation from last year. Like you're going to give him 1 year of a trial, but I mean, if the Eagles are picking in the top 3 next year, they're going to be tempted to be in this same discussion as they are, no matter how good Hurts was. There's always going to be that temptation of like, well, he was a second rounder. He has limitations. If they ever find themselves in the position to get, you know, a number 1 or number 2 pick, he's dead in the water. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
So here's the thing. If they're picking in the top 10 next year, it's because Hurts wasn't very good, because that would assume that they didn't draft a quarterback this year, and they did draft Jamar Chase, who falls to them at 6 somehow, or Devontae Smith, whatever, one of those guys. But they should have an actual receiver room to next year, you know, with Rager hopefully healthy, a wide receiver that's probably at worst the second off the board in the draft, and it's hopefully Jamar Chase. And yeah, nothing bad about Hurts. I mean, it's funny because in the local media, he's pretty much the anti-Wentz. You know, Wentz is this sullen, just keeps to himself, kind of type A personality, and Hurts seems to be just this, you know, happy-go-lucky guy that's a leader of men, and you know, he's a quarterback. He's what you want your quarterback to be.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the most fascinating situations. And I think, you know, you hit it with the price. That's probably what he's worth. I'd probably try to buy on the margins right now and maybe get him a little bit cheaper, knowing that, you know, if they draft a quarterback, then that 112 that you spent is probably, that was bad. That's the gamble you lost. But if you buy for the 112 and he gives you, you know, I would pay the 112 for one top 12 season. That, you know, that's what I paid for. Like people are paying late first, early seconds for Tom Brady, and they're getting at best like a quarterback 10. You know, they're just looking for a stable body for 1 year that they know is going to be the starter as long as he plays. So, I mean, you know, it just depends on your situation and, you know, if you have that extra pick that you can throw. But I certainly would be fishing for, you know, prices around in that range. Any other names you want to bring up? Or I know we'll cover quarterbacks probably a million times on this show in the next month. Any other names that come to mind you want to talk about?
No, but this is why Superflex is the best, the absolute best format. And I say that as a person that my first couple of years, I only played in start 1 QB leagues, and I thought Superflex leagues were too gimmicky and just silly. But can you imagine being in 1 quarterback leagues tonight? the last 2 weeks, none of this mattered to you. You didn't care about Wentz getting traded. You didn't care about Stafford getting traded. But in Superflex leagues, man, this has spurred trades, talk, in both of our patron chats. That's good 5 hours of straight talking just about quarterback stuff. So no real names, but I think this is why Superflex is the best. And if you haven't tried it, you really need to try it.
Yeah. I mean, and hit either one of us up. Both of us, I think, are trying to legislate how many leagues we join. I've already joined a couple, and I know you have too. But if you want one, there's plenty of people we can ask and get you in one. I probably get asked at least 3 or 4 a week. Like, hey, you want to jump in? Or I see one and I see the format, and I'm like, man, that's right in my range. I'd love to jump in, and then all of a sudden, we're back to the point where we need to cut down, and it's just a cycle. So you do have to, if you want a Superflex league, let us know.
Yep. Please let me know, because that's one less league that I can join if you take that slot. So Please feel free to reach out to me, and I will get you in touch with people that are starting leagues. We got a guy that started, I don't know, like 13 leagues this week in our patron chats. So yeah, they're definitely out there.
Yeah, and those patron chats, where's yours? Plug it.
What's it? Dynasty Trades HQ. Yeah,
that's your show, right? Dynasty Trades HQ.
Yeah.
All right.
And that's also there's a free version of the podcast that's also very good.
Yep.
Yeah. Don't listen to it around children.
I'll vouch for it. Yeah, there's a clean version, and there's an explicit version, and then there's a patron version. So something for everybody.
None of those versions should be listened to around children. So don't do that.
Yeah, and the ones that Dynasty and Chill. So patreon.com, Dynasty Trades HQ, Dynasty and Chill. To be honest, join one, join the other. It's probably half the people are the same. So, and the discussions are a lot of times the same in both. So I know I switch back and forth like to one and the other. And, sometimes I just say the same things in both, or focus on one and focus on the other. But anyway, it's a good time. I'm sure we'll cover a ton more quarterbacks. Shane, are we going to really try to do this every week?
Yeah, if people actually tell us they want us to.
They do.
They can just comment below, because I like reading the comments and responding back. Send some DMs to Ryan McDowell and Ken Kelly. And if you harass them enough, I'm sure they'll tell us that we should do this every week. Yep.
Yeah, we'll try to do it. And especially the next couple months, because there's going to be probably a trade a week or a trade or a move or a signing or a cut or something like that, where there's always going to be, we could do content for days, but there's probably always going to be something that's going to affect multiple players. We didn't even get in tonight to how this is going to impact running backs, offenses, wide receivers, tight ends, any of that stuff. So maybe we'll do some of that next week if there's no major moves. But Shane is the worst. Charles Chill, FFB, Dynasty League football, all the stuff below. Click on those little buttons. Those are cool. They're usually the graphics are, we don't see the graphics when we're doing this, but they're really cool when you watch the video. So make sure you click on those and subscribe. Leave a comment, and we'll try to hit one of these up next week. Manic and Chill out. Any final word, Shane?
See you next month.
No, we will see you next week.
Next week. We will see you next week.
Later, DLF.